Thank you. When Joe Mulholland first wrote to me asking me to attend this year's McGill Summer School, one of the questions he suggested that I might look at is, what would you put in your election manifesto? Let me say from the outset that I have no political ambitions. Or put in another way, I have enough problems in the church to look after. But that said, I would note that many of the problems that the church faces are similar to those of our republic as we face the crossroads and enter into a post-2016 republic. When I think of the future of church and state, there's one word comes to my mind quite regularly, and that is the word cohesion. Church and state need both new policies of cohesion. What do I mean? Cohesion isn't conformity or rigid ideology. Cohesion, as is often the case, can best be defined by looking at its opposite, which could be running around in all directions. Could be a phrase we've heard used today, fragmentation. It could be the phrase we hear today, splintering in our society. Last May, President Higgins gave a remarkable address to the coalition of voluntary organisations called The Wheel. He wanted to talk about the principles which should guide a realistic future for Ireland as a nation and as a democracy. And he set out the context, I think, very clearly. He said, we set out about the work of transition from a society which was not the best version of ourselves to one which is grounded in a more ethical version of our Irishness. And I could say the same. We have to move from a model of the church, which is not the best version of ourselves, to one which is grounded in a more authentic version of what being a Christian is. And the fundamental thesis of President Higgins, and I'll read it at some length, a major cause of our recent economic crisis was a failure to question, to scrutinise and to challenge highly individualised projects of accumulation and self-centred ideas of consumption, which over time had come to be substituted for models of public welfare shared in the public space and enjoyed in the public world. And he said, an unrestrained competition has seen the extension of the space of the market to the centre of public policy on matters far beyond economic goods and far beyond appropriate areas of competitive choice. Now, that's very close to an important principle which Pope John Paul II stressed in an encyclical Centesimus Annus, where he stressed that the economy is only one aspect and one dimension of human activity, and economic freedom is only one element of human freedom. If economic life is absolutised, if the production and consumption of goods becomes the centre of social life and society's only value, not subject to any other value, then economic freedom loses its necessary relationship with the human person and ends up by alienating and oppressing. And he stressed very much that there are many fundamental human needs which find no place. They don't belong on the market. But these needs always need to be satisfied. So is our political system in Ireland today a politics of national cohesion? I believe the answer is not. I'm not pointing a finger at any individual or group, but at a system that seems to be evolving. The fact that so many Irish men and women opt to support independent politicians, and we have a political system which favours that, it does point to a lack of confidence in the traditional parties and perhaps even a lack of trust in the political party that we know. Some of the challenges have been addressed here in Glenties this week. They're not necessarily Irish problems. The emergence in most European countries today of coalition governments, for various reasons, back to fragmentation, it means that while you vote for a particular election manifesto, what you get, it's not a coalition of manifestos, but a compromise of manifestos. In some countries, they've turned to the idea of the grand coalition between the two major parties. Whereas that may be a good thing to address urgent problems, it would bring a fundamental imbalance into our political system where government and opposition have different but very important roles. Cohesion is never attained through conformity or simple compromise. Why are people uneasy about political parties? In many European countries, political parties have been at the root of corruption. Not simply corruption for personal gain and greed, but corruption because the way political parties have emerged. Politics and political parties constitute a very costly business in today's world. None of us this evening, I think, would even dream of having the funds necessary to run to be President of the United States of America. And political parties have in some countries become dinosaurs, which consume vast amounts of money and obstruct the real purpose of a political party, which is that of mediating between policy formation and the citizen. What's the role of the political party? A democratic political system shouldn't limit the role of citizens to voting in elections or referendums or being targeted in opinion polls. Part of the role of the political party should be ensuring a real voice for citizens outside of elections and involving citizens in the decision-making of government and local administration. Where this doesn't happen, where citizens feel marginalised and alienated, the result will be a political culture that becomes detached from the concerns and experiences of citizens and leaves the path open only to negativity. I must say I'm very concerned that a confused policy on migration in this country seems to be giving rise for the first time in Irish society for a political party focusing on the single issue of immigration. McGill was a migrant himself, and we should remember that. And we need a healthy policy about migration. The emergence of such a large proportion of voters in Ireland and across Europe who feel they would support a range of candidates, independent candidates, representing at times radically different views, is very significant. Very often it's a protest vote. Protest can be a strong message. Protest can be a strong cry for change. But you cannot run a nation on protest alone. You need a policy, and you need a cohesive policy. I lived for many years in Italy, and when I have a fascination for Italian politics. When I arrived in Italy, I found it very difficult to understand the Italian political system, just as I'm sure an Italian coming to Ireland today would find it very hard to understand our political parties. But the system evolved for many decades with two major parties, Christian Democrats and Communists, and 3 or 4 smaller parties. The interesting thing is, of those parties which were there when I arrived in Italy, none of them exist today. It's fascinating to walk 50 metres, which separated the massive headquarters of the Italian Christian Democrat Party and the Italian Communist Party, to find both buildings empty or being used now for other office space. Could Ireland experience such a radical earthquake in its system of political parties? Should Ireland experience such a radical earthquake in political parties? Is this what's actually beginning to happen through fragmentation, proliferation of political parties? But where is the discussion taking place about the wider issues of what political parties are there to do? Is pragmatism and spin doctoring, is that the only way? Reflection on these questions is not a luxury. It's not dreaming at the expense of day-to-day pragmatism. In fact, on so many occasions, it was the dreamers who brought about change in Irish politics and brought about those occasional but extremely important qualitative leaps which really changed the Irish political landscape over decades. I should really talk also about the Church and the challenges the Church has to face. I limit myself in saying the Catholic Church in Ireland will never again be the church that it was 10, 20 or 20 years ago. Why? The reason as much is that because the teaching of Jesus Christ will never be happy when people try to encapsulate it in the culture of any time in history, and especially in the past. The message of Jesus is perennially new and constantly challenges. Things are improving in the Catholic Church, but the moment that I say the Church has turned the corner, the temptation is then to think that things can now go back to where they were before. Indeed, there are worrying signs within the Catholic Church that some, even young people, are seeking refuge from the challenges of life by adapting ways of the past and retreating from dialogue with the present into the false security of imaginary times. The statistics show that the future of the Church will be a very different future. But despite all the criticism of the Church, I think there's very little doubt that among the most respected categories of people in Irish society today are our local priest. And they must be in the top 5 for good reason. I'm afraid the bishops as a group are probably farther down on the popularity gauge. Just one final point, and that is, I hope that in the run-up to the 2016 celebrations, historians will take a closer look at the religious roots of the thought of the main protagonists of the Easter Rising. These were men and women not supported by church leaders, but who were nonetheless able to develop a remarkable social manifesto, a Republican proclamation, which emerged from leaders who were unapologetically proud of the fact that their ideas were inspired and their ideas would be realized in the name of God, to use the first words of that proclamation.